Picture this. You're in the middle of the most chaotic moment of your life. Everything is falling apart around you. Your boss is screaming. Your inbox has 500 unread messages. Your relationship is on the rocks. And somehow, there's one person in the room who looks like they're sitting by a quiet lake on a Sunday morning. That person isn't broken. They aren't checked out. They aren't on medication that numbs them to reality. They have something far more powerful than any of that. They have weaponized calm. And by the end of this video, so will you. I want to be completely upfront with you about something. Stoicism is one of the most misunderstood philosophies that has ever existed. Most people hear the word Stoic and immediately picture someone cold, emotionless, distant, someone who suppresses everything they feel until they eventually implode in private. That is not what this is, not even close. The Stoics were deeply emotional people. Marcus Aurelius wrote obsessively about his own frustrations, his fears, his grief. Seneca wrote some of the most raw and honest letters about anxiety and existential dread that you will ever read. Epictetus, who was literally enslaved for much of his life, developed a philosophy not to hide from suffering, but to move through it with power. What these people discovered was something that modern psychology is only now beginning to catch up to, and we are going to break it down in a way that you can actually use today. Let's start with the foundational idea that makes everything else possible. The Stoics had this concept called the dichotomy of control. The basic idea is this: there are things in this world that are up to you, and there are things that are not up to you. Your opinions, your reactions, your choices, your values, these are yours. The weather, other people's behavior, the economy, traffic, whether your flight gets delayed, whether your pitch gets accepted, whether someone likes you back, none of that is yours. The Stoics argued that almost all human suffering comes from one single mistake. We spend enormous amounts of energy trying to control things that were never ours to control in the first place. And in doing so, we completely neglect the one thing that is always, entirely, unconditionally ours: our response. Think about the last time you were genuinely stressed out. Really think about it. What was causing the stress? Now ask yourself an honest question. Was the stress actually coming from the situation itself, or was it coming from your interpretation of the situation? Because here's what the Stoics understood with stunning clarity. Events are neutral. They carry no inherent meaning until we assign meaning to them. A traffic jam is not stressful. Your story about what the traffic jam means for your day is stressful. A harsh email from your manager is not devastating. Your interpretation of what that email says about your career and your worth is what creates the devastation. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly in his private journal, which we now call Meditations. He wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And he was right. The moment you truly grasp this, something in your nervous system starts to shift. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where I think most people who dabble in Stoicism miss the point entirely. This philosophy is not about thinking your way out of emotions. It is not about using logic as a weapon against your feelings. The Stoics were not trying to eliminate emotion. They were trying to eliminate the tyranny of emotion. There is a massive difference. The goal is not to stop feeling. The goal is to feel without being hijacked, to experience anger without becoming anger, to experience fear without being paralyzed by fear, to experience grief without believing that grief is permanent and all-consuming. This is what Marcus Aurelius was practicing every single morning when he would sit with his journal before the chaos of governing an empire would consume his day. He was not suppressing. He was preparing. And this brings us to one of the most powerful practical tools in the entire Stoic tradition. It's called negative visualization, or what Seneca called the premeditation of adversity. The idea sounds strange at first, maybe even counterintuitive, especially if you've been raised in a culture obsessed with positive thinking. But here's how it works. Instead of imagining only the best-case scenario, you deliberately spend a few minutes each day imagining what could go wrong. You sit with the discomfort of those possibilities. You ask yourself, if this happened, could I handle it? And more often than not, you realize the answer is yes. What this practice does is extraordinary. It inoculates you against shock. It trains your nervous system to treat difficulty as a familiar guest rather than a terrifying stranger. And it produces this remarkable side effect of making you genuinely grateful for what you currently have, because you've just spent time vividly imagining life without it. Let me give you a real-world application of this. Say you have a big presentation coming up and you're terrified of failing. Most people try to avoid that fear by telling themselves it'll be fine, by distracting themselves, by over-preparing in a frantic, anxious way. A Stoic takes a completely different approach. They sit down, close their eyes, and actually walk through the worst version of the scenario. The presentation bombs. People look unimpressed. You stumble over your words. Your mind goes blank. And then they ask, okay, and then what? In most cases, what follows that exercise is a recognition that you would survive, that your identity and your worth are not actually on the line, that failure is an event, not a verdict. And paradoxically, that recognition is what allows you to walk into the presentation with genuine calm, not fake positivity, actual grounded confidence. Now, I want to talk about something that most people in the self-improvement space never address because it makes audiences uncomfortable. Stoicism requires you to stop being a victim, not in a dismissive, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of way, but in a deeply empowering, radically honest kind of way. The Stoic tradition insists that as long as you believe your mental state is being caused by something external, you will remain powerless. Because external things can always change. People will always disappoint you. Life will always throw surprises at you. The economy will always cycle. The only stable foundation is the inner one. Epictetus, again a man who had been enslaved, who had suffered in ways most of us will never comprehend, looked at his circumstances and said, "You cannot control what has been done to me, but you cannot control what I do with it." That is not toxic positivity. That is one of the most psychologically sophisticated ideas ever articulated by a human being. Here's something else the Stoics understood that modern stress science is now confirming. Chronic stress is almost never about a single event. It's about accumulated resistance. It's about the ongoing war we wage against reality as it actually is. The Stoics had a concept for this too, and it comes from a phrase in Marcus Aurelius that translates roughly to "the obstacle is the way." The idea is that the things blocking your path are not separate from your journey. They are your journey. Every frustration you encounter is training. Every setback is feedback. Every moment of discomfort is the exact territory in which your character is being built. And when you genuinely internalize that, when it stops being a nice quote on a motivational poster and starts being a lens through which you see your actual life, everything changes. Stress doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it completely transforms. Let's talk about the daily practice, because philosophy without practice is just entertainment. The Stoics were obsessive about daily rituals. Morning reflection was sacred. Marcus Aurelius began each day by reminding himself of the difficulties he was likely to encounter and by reconnecting with his values. Evening reflection was equally important. Seneca wrote about ending each day by sitting with 3 questions. Where did I go wrong today? Where did I do well? What could I do differently tomorrow? This isn't self-flagellation. It's calibration. It's the daily maintenance of the inner instrument. And it takes maybe 10 minutes. 10 minutes that most of us spend scrolling through social media that leaves us feeling worse than before we started. The last thing I want to leave you with is this. Weaponized calm is not about being above the fray. It is not about being superior or disconnected or above feeling things deeply. It's about developing such a solid relationship with your own inner life that the chaos outside simply cannot reach the core of you. The Stoics called this the inner citadel, that place inside you that cannot be touched by circumstance, by opinion, by outcome. Building that citadel is the work of a lifetime. But it starts today, right now, with a single shift in perspective. The next time you feel stress rising, instead of immediately reacting, instead of immediately fighting or fleeing or freezing, pause, just for a breath, and ask yourself, what part of this is actually in my control? Then put every ounce of your energy there and let the rest go. That pause, that single breath, that one question, that is the entire philosophy in a single moment. That is weaponized calm. That is the Stoic way. If this shifted something in you, go deeper. Your next step is already waiting.